Welcome to Raw Conscious Talk Podcast. Today we have the closet spiritualist, Franco Ramiro, top 10 best-selling author, psychic, clairvoyant, spiritual coach, and speaker, as well as co-founder of MyNourish.com. Welcome, Franco.
How's it going, Tammy? Good to see you. It's
Very
been a
good.
hot minute
Yes,
since
it
we
has.
last talked to each other.
Yes,
It's good
it
to
has.
see you.
Thank you. Good to see you too. So, in your book, by the way,
Look at that. Yes.
your first quote is, "Waking up to one's truth is the hardest thing you will ever do." Let's talk about that.
Okay, listen up here, Tammy. I got to tell you something. I have done a lot of interviews, and I've had every question almost conceivably under the sun thrown at me. And somehow I've always managed to find a way to answer those questions, right? I have never been asked a question about that subtitle. And I have brought
Wow.
it up, and I've brought it up in interviews a couple times, probably just not very long ago. But nobody's ever asked me that question. And so, as I normally do, I give kudos to you. You're right. You say you came prepared. You're not even. It's interesting because another sidebar note is that sometimes you were saying off camera that I don't talk about certain things much in some of my most recent interviews. And it's because there's so much to cover for one. I mean, there's just so much. The book was the foundational piece for a lot of things. And what really it turned out to be was a coming out party, right? It's a closet spiritualist coming out of the closet to share so many other things that are now part of my story. And so it's rare when I really get a chance to kind of go back to the book, which, by the way, I'm coming out with my second and third ones here in the next 6 to 9 months. So that's pretty exciting.
Yes,
'Cause
I'm very excited.
I'm glad you are, because I never really knew when that day would come, but it's starting to become far more likely now, more than ever. So, but anyway, going back to the book, I don't really speak about the book much because sometimes when I do, I feel like I don't want it to be about a promotion of the book. But since you
Yes.
mentioned, and since you brought up the subtitle, I will tell you that is just a rock solid question.
Thank you.
Because it gets lost in all of the things that are in the book. And there's, again, all the things I've talked about. Waking up to your truth. If I had to sum it up, which I did there, but if I had to sum it up in all the interviews and everything I've talked about, it's everything I talk about is to help people wake up to their truth. Okay, so this game is really fascinating, really fun, although some people may dispute that one. It's certainly got its twists and turns and its ups and downs, and it's complicated because we make it so. But no matter how you're looking at it, this game gives you this thing we call reality, this life, okay? It gives you so many different ways to find your way back to the truth, to your truth. So many different ways, okay? But at the end of the day, no matter what path you take, you're going to get to this place that you call your truth.
Yes.
And doubt it. You're going to doubt it. Straight up doubt it. Okay? And if you find a way in which to stop doubting your truth, yourself, really, you're going to face another sort of roadblock, which is your fear. And doubt is part of fear, but now this one is just a more generalized, all right, what the hell do I do now? Okay, what if I am this thing that I am? What if I truly am? So where do I go from here? Because I was going to say there's no book written about it, but actually I did. I wrote it. I mean, not the only other books out there, but I wrote at least one book that you can use to weave your way through it. But did you ever see A Few Good Men, the movie?
Yes, I did.
Okay. All right. Well, then you know what I'm about to say. All right. For anybody who has, you'll know what I'm talking about. There's a scene in the movie where one of the actors, Jack Nicholson, I believe, I always get his last name. I know who he is, but I always get his last name botched up. But Jack Nicholson goes, "You can't handle the truth." That's bottom line. You can't handle the truth. Referring to this overwhelming reality check in the movie about something that people did not want to accept as real. Okay? Particular case, bringing it back down to here, we just can't at this point handle the truth very well, that we are very likely, and I mean, I'm saying 100%, okay, so it's not even very likely, we are who we are. We are divine intelligence. I sometimes soften it by saying we're divine intelligent beings, but we're divine intelligence.
Yes.
And call it whatever you want to call it in this 3D language, source, oneness, God, creator, whatever you want to call it, we are divine intelligence. Not a divine intelligence, the divine intelligence playing a game.
I
Playing a
agree.
game.
I
And,
agree
well, you,
100%. I
you
use the
agree.
term, yeah, I use the term powerful spiritual beings. We are
Yes,
just
and that's
powerful
good.
spiritual
Yes.
beings. Yes.
The so back to the question, I mean, back to your question. Dealing with that truth is
Mhm.
very, very difficult for so many reasons, even if you really desperately want to believe it, because it's so much easier not to believe it. It's so much easier because of the way we've been conditioned. And
Yes.
and I've had this said to me in different ways by a few of the naysayers. It's just, show me the money. Show me, show me, show me, show me, show me. And it's like, I can't show you. I could tell you, but I can't show you, because the whole process of this remembrance, this awakening, is to show yourself. And then
Yes.
things will happen. Then the world will open up. Then everything becomes this proverbial heaven on earth. I can't show you that, because that would then defeat the purpose of coming out to your truth. And that's
Mhm.
what makes it super duper hard. But that subtitle, it gets lost. It gets
Mhm.
lost because well, partly because it's really small, but it just gets lost, and it's just easier to focus on just the closet spirit just coming out to your truth. As I wrote in the book originally, in that first couple of pages, nobody really understands, unless they've done it themselves,
Mhm.
the process by which you go through, the battles, the wages inside yourself to come to that conclusion and to achieve that pinnacle point where you can look back and say, yeah, I'm on the other side now and I can see my truth now. Nobody understands that process, how difficult that process is, because we make it difficult, okay?
Yes.
Difficult and deep and intense and committed one has to be to go through that process. Nobody understands that. All they see is the after piece. And they say, well, that's where they go, what did they don't even ask the question, what did you go through to come up with this enlightenment? I went through a lot. I'm speaking about all of us. We go through a lot. But
Mhm.
unless we're willing to do that, then, to your question about the truth, coming out to your truth, that's going to be super duper hard to do. It's just going to be super
Mhm.
duper hard, because you're going to constantly be sitting there going, I don't see anything changing. So I don't know. I don't believe anything you're saying. Well, that's because you haven't done the inward quest, as I talk about, to remember who you are. It's easy. We just love to make it complicated. So, kind of a long-winded answer to what I believe was your question, but ideally, that's what the subtitle is all about. That is by far the hardest thing you will ever do in this reality.
I agree. Agree. And when I came to the point that you came to, I said to myself, I can't talk about this anymore. I have to be about it. I
There
just
you go.
have
And
to be about it.
that's
Hmm.
the other piece. That's the other
Hmm.
piece. If you've been, you said that you've been scanning around and you watched a lot of my other interviews, I'm going, dang, that's a lot of stuff there. But what I've been talking about in the last year now is
Hmm.
that you have to be the truth now. It's time for you, and that's all good. But
Yes.
if you don't actually become the truth that you are, then you're missing the final piece of what you came here to do,
Yes,
which was
exactly.
to truly own it, to truly, truly own it, embody
Yes,
it.
I agree. So your message and how you got to the point that you're at, maybe not now, but at least 2 years ago, because you've grown so much just in the last, through all the
Well,
interviews that I've watched, you've grown. But I would absolutely love for you to go into when you began to wake up, when you began realizing that you had an NDE, you had a just the whole woo, just the whole experience that
That's a
brought you.
lot. Yeah, because those could be literally broken into their own segments. So I'm going to kind of give you I'll give you the 25-cent tour, okay, which is better than the five. We
Yes,
would have to wait for the bigger tour maybe some other time. It's something that actually I was feeling into lately, as well as I've gone through even a greater sense of transformation even in the last 6 months. Okay.
yes,
And I want to just clarify something that I'm not like saying that I've hit the pinnacle of everything. But I also don't want to convey that some people say, you never stop learning or remembering or being taught. And I mean, because that seems like forever then,
mhm,
and that just seems deflating to feel like you're never going to get there, because that's absolutely not true. It's all about growth. And in this particular game, it's about remembering, the remembering of that growth. And that still seems a little abstract. But I've said this before, once you start to remember who you really are, it's like you have amnesia. And when you start to remember your true identity of who you are, it changes the complexity and the complexion of the game completely,
right,
entirely. End of story.
right,
So with all of that said, for me, I've always known as a kid that I was different. And I feel like I could speak to a
mhm,
lot of people who will be listening to this, okay? Most of the people that I run across are people that have, at most, not all, have had this sense of feeling different than who they have been told they are, okay? Feeling like
yes,
maybe they don't jive with everything that everyone has been saying about reality, about life, their connection with this thing called God, their purpose here, the purpose of this world, the nature of this reality. They just don't. But because they had to live within the confines of what I call the social conditioning, they had to keep quiet in some way, shape, or form. They had to shut themselves down to their own truth. But that
mhm,
never kept them from running into things that would remind them of that truth. So for me, as far as I can go back, I've always known that there was something different, but I didn't
mhm,
know how to describe it. For me, even before I remembered my NDE, which was when I was at the age of 15, which isn't that difficult to do when one understands that in the realm of the spiritual world, or the spirit realm, there's no such thing as time. So everything can be
mhm,
actually happening at the same time, okay?
mhm.
But that notion is a bit esoteric, if not hugely abstract, and so it's hard for us to fathom this. But for now, I will just say that to experience something at the age of 15 that happened when I was 6 months old is not impossible once you get outside of a frequency of 3D. Okay, so with that being said, at the age of 15, I remember that I had had a near-death experience. And I'll explain that in a second. But prior to that, I had had so many other experiences, just like so many other people, that reminded me that this reality wasn't what everybody was saying it was. So I lived 6 years in a home that was extraordinarily paranormal. I mean, extraordinarily.
I know, and
Um,
I'd so love to talk about that too because I can so relate with you. And oh my gosh, I know exactly what you're saying.
yeah, so I mean,
Just
that's
a
again,
brief, just a little brief on the paranormal.
okay, really, really brief, because I don't know I'm not sure how I abbreviate this, but okay, so we moved into at the age of I was 5, 6-ish. I was just 5, turning 6 when we moved into a home. We were kind of we were a bit transient as
Mhm,
a family. We didn't own a home, So we just rented. And so we moved around a bit in the city. I lived in Chicago at the time. And we moved into this house, which was actually for us pretty exciting because up until then, from the limited time that I had been alive, we were just living in apartments, and almost on the yearly basis we were moving. So this house was really gave us a sense of like being a family, so to speak. Like we were living in a home and stuff, and it felt like we were going to stay there for a while. So that was cool too. I just remember these little nuggets of things, how excited we were about moving into this house. And on the surface, this was a nice blue collar neighborhood in Chicago, and it just was nice. It was like we felt like this was going to be a good place. It turns out that within just a matter of months of moving into the house, we started to my middle sibling, my brother, was starting to have bizarre dreams and started to talk about noises and voices and things that he was seeing, and nobody took him seriously. I mean, nobody else was really experiencing that at the point. I talk about this in the book. One night he had this, wasn't a dream. He woke up to this sound, this noise coming from our porch, and it was an enclosed porch, so it wasn't like a stranger could really come in pretty easily. And he saw this being, a shadow of a being that he said was a relatively large being, and it had these glaring red eyes. And he's 8 or 9 years old. He sees this thing, and he's running for the hills, and he's letting everybody know. So he's screaming all over the house, like hysterically. And when everybody got up and checked it out, there was nothing there. But I remember feeling like, I don't know about that. I don't know about that. And as I mentioned it really briefly in the book, it began this sane odyssey of events where ultimately there were minor possessions. It's really, and I want to mention for anybody who's into that stuff, there's no such thing as a full possession. And I could get into that if we had time, but a minor possession is one where there was an integration of these two souls or consciousness. One wasn't very happy, and the other one was innocent, so to speak. Okay, and that was not me, but it was my brother. And so we had that. We had exorcisms where we actually had, back then. My family was very devout Catholics. So we got the local parish involved, and we had the priests come in. And at first they were like really thought we were nuts, but then it didn't take very long. There was a younger priest who kind of took us under his wing, and it didn't take very long for him to be literally in the room where my brother and I stayed in. And he was speaking in all sorts of gibberish language and deep voices that were not his, and being thrown around the room. He finally gave up trying because it takes a trained person to do an exorcism. And so we had a petition to the Vatican, and when that was denied because the Vatican was going through some it's always going through some dark stuff, but this was the time of the movies like The Omen, The Exorcist,
Yes.
and so they didn't want it. They didn't. Poltergeist. Poltergeist was in some ways baby stuff compared to the Exorcism and Omen and stuff, and they didn't want to showcase. They didn't want to spotlight anything, so they were really denying, and they were getting gazillion requests because of stuff like that. So they turned us down, and so we had to get another minister to do it. All sorts of things. So we had that, and again, minor possessions. We had blood dripping out of walls. Wow. We had you name it. We went through it, and just like a good movie. Like a good B-rated movie, like a B movie, you're sitting there going, why the hell would you stay there for 6 years? You would don't you like watch these movies and go, girlfriend, get out of there now. You don't go walking into a dark room and go, hello, is anybody here? But in some bizarre way, it happened the way it had to happen. Excuse me. And we did stay there way longer than we should have.
Yeah,
and
6 years is a long time in a
6
house
years
that
is a long time.
is got some activity going on.
Serious activity. Oh my gosh.
Hmm.
And well, it turned out, after some subsequent research, it turned out that that the people that home was pretty old. In
Hmm.
back then it was the 70s. Okay, but that home actually dated back to like the early 1900s. And
Okay.
long story made short, there the it was at one time it was a single home. It had been broken up into two units by the time
Hmm.
we moved in, and it was owned by a gentleman who had a daughter, and she the way that they say was she would. I'll just tell in modern language, okay, today's language. She had a lot of clairvoyant abilities, and
Hmm.
she knew how to communicate. She was a medium. She knew how to communicate with the other side. In fact, she allowed herself. She used herself as the shine to allow them to come through her in order to be a gateway to the other side. Okay,
Hmm.
and there were interesting things about our house, the way it was designed. It had doors that opened up to nothing, and
Wow.
yeah, I mean, it just was, you open it up and it was dirt. It was, and so we
Wow.
knew from early on that there was a gateway. It was a gateway. It's a
Hmm.
portal into to the other side. And so
Hmm.
anyway, long story made a little bit shorter. She committed suicide because her
Oh.
father locked her up in the attic, which is like typical Hollywood movie, but it's true. He locked her
Hmm.
up in the attic. She was kind of outcasted by everybody, and
Hmm.
she hung herself. And so then he subsequently killed himself a few years later out of grief, guilt, whatever. So when I went back there a few years ago put to put a ribbon around this experience in my life, to bring closure to it and bring a shine back to that house. And it's actually, I went back and it was as spooky as it was when I was a little kid. When I did that, at that point I already had an understanding, because I do a fair amount of shamanic work as well. I had an understanding of how to exercise the home and to be the light like the little girl was. So interestingly enough, when I did that, I actually got to meet the little girl and her father. They were two of about 8 or 9 souls that were still in that space, kind of stuck, if you will, trying to make their way through the light. So I actually
Wow.
got to see her,
Now,
and
this
got
was at 15 years old you were able to,
no, no,
or
no.
you
This
mean
was
later on
much later on.
in life? Okay.
About 3 or 4 years ago, I went back
Okay.
to that place to
Okay.
knowing what I know now in terms of how to do that. I went back and I put closure to that episode of my life. I put closure for
Hmm.
the sake of what happened there, for the light beings that were playing in that role of being stuck. They were still stuck there, and I used myself as the shine. So they went one by
Right.
one, they went through me. There was a family of four, a man and a woman,
Wow.
2 children who
Hmm.
died in some sort of boat accident. They were
Hmm.
stuck in there. They were stuck in there because they
Wow.
were they used her, and so she pulled them in from all sorts of different areas of the field,
Hmm.
and so they were using her as a gateway through. There was a woman that was in her 80s. She was somewhere from Eastern Europe, and she
Hmm.
was talking in some language that I didn't know, and she was stuck there too. So there were,
Hmm.
and then again, the father and the daughter, and there were a couple other people, and so it was pretty fascinating to see that. And so what I do tell people, just to finally put a little bit of this together, is that what people experience in terms of that sort of misguided, chaotic, somewhat scary energy that a lot of times is perceived through the paranormal.
Hmm.
What I came to realize, and this was even before 3 or 4 years ago, was that that energy, those beings that are stuck that way,
Hmm.
in between dimensions, those beings, the reason they act out a lot of times in that bizarre way, not like in Hollywood where, they're chopping up people and dragging them under
Right.
beds and stuff like that, but they still can have a tendency of looking that way to most people, is because if you can imagine being stuck in what you would consider to be perpetuity, okay? and you can't get to that light, and you can feel the light, okay?
Hmm.
And you can't get there. You don't know how to get there. As far as you know, you have lost all sense of time, okay? And to make matters worse, you then are able to still keep some aspect of yourself connected here in this world, and you
Hmm.
can feel the people, especially the children that come in and out of that home, that have the shine, and and nobody can hear you. Nobody can hear you. You're screaming and nobody can hear you. So you can imagine that
Hmm.
if you were in that situation, even for a week, okay, you would go
Right.
nuts. Imagine being stuck there for what you feel is perpetuity, forever. You would be going absolutely nuts trying to get the attention of people. You just would be
Hmm.
almost out of your mind. So
I
that's what I understood about that
right.
process. And so when I
I
when they
wonder if that knowledge that you just gave, which makes total and 100% complete sense, is how hell got created. You
Yeah,
know
it's
how,
like the concept of hell. Yes, the
right.
concept of hell.
Hmm.
That is a very nice way, yeah, of segueing into that.
Hmm.
It's really, and I don't know any of. I really, honestly, have never spent time figuring out who or why the concept of hell was
Hmm.
created, or then later on, I do have a little bit more of a sense of why, at least in Catholicism. I'm not sure in Christianity, the concept of purgatory was
Hmm.
created, because in a sense what one goes through when you're stuck between dimensions is a
Right.
sense of everlasting purgatory, because I maintain to this day that I absolutely, having had a near-death experience, and fully remembering a lot of it now, having gone through the paranormal experience of that
Hmm.
home, having gone through the shamanic experiences of understanding how consciousness, souls, get stuck and why they would behave the way they do, I
Hmm.
understand that hell is voila. It's all it is. It's all of this. This is
Hmm.
really it's a when you turn off and forget everything that you are, it is a living hell.
Yes,
Okay?
I agree.
and and
Hmm.
and the way that the game, and I do refer to it as a game, because it's not a metaphor. The way that it's
Hmm.
been set up is for you to see how deep you can go into that forgetfulness, how deep you can go into that madness of that abyss of not knowing who you are, and which then becomes a hell
Wow.
experience, and how
Yeah,
you come back out of
that's a
it.
great analogy as well in explaining it. And wow, yeah, I'm feeling and I'm hearing everything that you're saying, and it's just totally resonating with me. And it's you just
Yeah, I mean,
know
these
that
are,
it's true.
again, Tammy, it's these are great questions. I mean, every so often I get on a podcast or a YouTube interview, and I'll get some questions asked about that poor part of the
Hmm.
experience, but I rarely get it to the extent that I've been able to share it here, where I
Hmm.
try to put perspective on so many of the traditional ways in which we have been
Hmm.
taught to believe about certain aspects of the unknown, afterlife unknown, and how they relate to what we're going through right now, and
Right.
using it as a point of reference to help us to remember,
Hmm.
so that, as I point out in many of the interviews, so we can master this game and move on, because again, it really is a game of remembering, a game of growth.
Hmm.
And so a lot of these traditional concepts are just what they are. They're just antiquated based on the context within which, the
Right.
contextual times within which they were created. So
Hmm. Well,
yeah, that's all I got for you.
let's go let's go into the NDE a little bit. You don't have to go through every detail and
Okay.
you know, but
Yeah, that would
let's
take
talk
that would
about
that
your
would take up the
NDE that
rest of
you
the
came.
yeah, that
Yeah,
would take
because
up the rest of the interview.
we're 30 minutes in. I might have to bring you back on again when your schedule open back up, and because there's so much that I'd love to talk to you about and just share with the audience. So, but
You know,
I'd love for you to.
I will just do this, because we did this. We were talking about something, And that's when we decided, hey, this was off camera. We decided, hey, we should probably get this
Right.
recording because this is all good stuff. So I'm going to kind of bounce into a specific time in the NDE versus
Yes.
giving the story of the NDE, which I'd be happy to do at some other time.
Yes.
There was a time, as you know, because you brought it up and I mentioned it in the book. There's a time just as I was dying in the
Hmm.
hospital that my mother, and I was an infant, so just to give that context, I was really small, and my mother decided she wasn't going to stay at the hospital and be with me for what doctors were saying was maybe another couple of hours tops.
Right.
And and instead she just went into this kind of state of trance. And
Hmm.
the reason I can describe this pretty well is because when I was 15, I had a
Hmm.
series of visions and dreams that continued for a good 6 months or so. It allowed me these visions and dreams. And I say visions because sometimes I would have them when I woke up, like
Right.
in that lucid state. But when I was actually dreaming, then they were dreams. And so I
Hmm.
remember feeling the emotional energy of my mom. I was like as if I was her, or I was possessing her in the way of consciousness in the dreams. So I could really feel what she was going through. I could really feel the changes in her frequency and the way she
Hmm.
was reacting or responding to stuff that was happening in real time. So anyway, so she when she heard the news, she decided to pack up her things, which weren't that many things, so her purse, and she left the hospital. And there was a church not very far away from the hospital, and it was one that she had actually, as a family, we would go there, and so she chose to go there, and instead of staying at the hospital and be with the chaplain or the priest who was there. And when she got about a block away or so, it was only a few blocks, so it didn't take long for her to
Right.
get there.
Right.
But when she got to a block or so, and she could see the church, she was on a boulevard, and she could see the church at the end of the boulevard. She dropped down on her knees and started to
Hmm.
crawl to the church. Now, she just explains it that she just felt the desire to do this out of pure reverence
Yes.
for the moment. And so she crawled hands and knees to the church, and as she was going along, she was emotional and she was in some prayer, but when she got to the inside of the church, she immediately crawled up to the altar. And it was at that point where I could feel that I could sense like I was again inside of her. I was observing her and I was inside of her at the same time.
Yes.
I could sense that there was a very sizable, noticeable shift in her frequency.
Hmm.
She went from being in this somewhat agonizing experience, right,
Right.
to a sense of extraordinary gratitude
Hmm.
for the brief time that she had to be my mother. And so the rest of that time in the church, there was all of these fluctuations that were going on in her consciousness that I felt was also changing the energy in the church. At the time, I had no idea what any of that meant. I was just sitting
Hmm.
there and I was experiencing this, and I was 15, and these were just bizarre dreams for me. But what I came to realize later. Okay,
Hmm.
so as the story goes, as she was in there in the church, by the time she finished, and again, I'd be happy to come back and talk about this more specifically, but when she was finished, she had such a tremendous sense of peace
Hmm.
that no matter what, and she was kind of assuming that she was just coming to terms with my death at that moment. No matter
Hmm.
what, she would go back and everything was going to be fine. She didn't know if fine meant that she was just going to move on and live her life, or that she wasn't truly. The times that I went back and talked to her about this. This is how I experienced it. How did you actually experience it? And she was like, everything was spot on, she said. But she was really under the impression that she was going to get back to the church, and I mean, back to the hospital. And I was going to be dead. And so
Right.
sure. So she gets back to the hospital, and everybody's, literally crying tears of joy, but she didn't know that at first until the doctors came up to her and told her what had happened, that while she was in the church, this miracle had happened. And as
Right.
with most medical miracles, doctors just kind of go, okay, medical miracle, write it down in the notes. Next one, next, and they don't really sit there. They're not, for a lot of reasons, they don't sit there and really question what happened here. This is beyond medical explanation. But
Right. Exactly.
I focused the rest of my adult life, for the most part, on the miracle. And I missed some of the most salient points about the whole experience. So I looked at it as, and when I did finally know about the near-death experience, I told people about my near-death experience and the miracle that happened. But the real miracle that happened, and as I describe it in the book, is that she, whether she knew it or not, and she didn't, she went in herself and
Yes.
used certain frequencies such as gratitude. Okay. And she was able to get to a space where she was able to see a world that was so beautiful with my
Yes.
existence there, that the universe, meaning the game, meaning the higher aspects of consciousness, the oversoul, the higher you, whatever you want to call it, acknowledged what she was doing, acknowledged that she was picturing all the love and all the beauty around the short time that I was there, and gave her more of it. Because then she had visions about seeing me as an adult and what I would do, and it brought
Right.
tears to her eyes. The universe gave it to her because she asked for it. That was
Yes.
the thing that didn't connect for her, and it didn't connect for me for years and years and years, until I started going through my remembrance and awakening process. She didn't realize, as I pointed out in the book, she did not realize that at that moment she was able to move a mountain with the faith that
Yes.
she had. So that was the piece that I didn't put together until much later, and that is the most important piece that I now try to talk to people about, that we are divine beings, and if we knew how to play with our frequencies, we would be moving mountains all the time.
Yes.
And
Agree
so
100%. I agree 100%. So now let me just, on that note, as a 6-month-old baby, having these visions and going to your mother and saying, did this happen? Or however the discussion happened. Do you have memories of what was actually going on in your 6-month-old brain? Like what you were experiencing in the 6-month-old brain that was
I did,
dying?
for very briefly. I did, because
Hmm.
that's because I had, so in the dreams and the visions that I had there were really two narratives that I experienced in those dreams and visions. One was the narrative of following her through the process of what she went through to
Hmm.
do what she did to bring me back. Okay. And as a sidebar thing, which again we'll have to talk about a little bit at some other time, is that
Yes.
what she was able to do was to bring me back, but the aspect of me that left into the other side stayed. The part that came
Wow.
back was a walk-in. And
Hmm.
so
Wow.
we'll have to get into that some other time. But
Yes.
because
Oh my
but
gosh, because you just piqued my attention when you said that, but see that we're already going into 45 minutes on this interview.
yeah,
Oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to
so
schedule with you again to bring you back on for sure.
okay, I'd be happy to do that, absolutely. So I just wanted to tell you that in the second dream or vision that I would have, I actually
Mhm.
had the opportunity to spend a brief moment in the hospital room while my mom. So it's like one of those crazy Hollywood movies where you see one narrative go in one direction and then another narrative is
Right.
happening at the same time. So the second narrative was is that I got to see and feel and experience what was actually happening in the hospital room when she
Hmm.
left. And at that point, I got to experience the connection that I made with the consciousness or the soul of the child. That's where I became to where it didn't happen quite right away in the first go around, but that's probably why I had these dreams and visions a lot
Hmm.
over this time period. I became aware that this wasn't just any child, because in the room was my mom, my aunt, and some other women, and I knew that they were crying about me, but that wasn't really clear to me until I sat there in the room, different dream, different vision, and I was actually connecting with the consciousness of the baby, which I then realized was an aspect of me. And so
Right.
at that point, I did not experience anything other than the disconnection that occurred with the consciousness, otherwise known as the soul, from the body. And this is something that I also talk about very rarely, but when I do talk about this, I tell people that how people will get into this whole thing, and rightfully so, with family members and others who are suffering because they
Hmm.
are they're towards the end of their life and they're suffering at a hospital or what have you, and they don't want that person to be suffering anymore.
Right.
I tell them the soul will leave the body well before the body ends. Okay, so yes, on the surface, the individual is may look like they're suffering. I'm not going to dispute that, but there's only a tiny, 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 tiny fragment of the soul or consciousness of that individual that stays behind to shut things down, to turn off the lights, lock the doors, and leave. Okay, most of
Right.
the soul or consciousness leaves well before that happens, and so in my case, I got to experience the disconnection that I had from the body, or the consciousness had
Hmm.
it with the body, before the body actually got to the point of death. And so that might have been
Right.
several hours before the baby
Hmm.
died. But then I did get to see what that felt like. I got to experience connecting with it, and like some people have talked about in their own near-death experiences, being in this room, kind of
Hmm.
elevated
Hmm.
above everybody and watching this whole thing play out, people grieving over the baby and stuff, and then experiencing the process of going, quote unquote, into the light. And then
Right.
what happened to me when I got into the light. And a lot of it's talked about in the book, but also a lot of it has been a process of remembering that I have gone through especially in the last 5, 6, 7 years, where I've become very much more clear about what actually happened, besides what I talk about in the book, besides what I've talked about in other interviews, what happened. Um, because there's a lot more that happens, and
Hmm.
when I've gone and talked to near death experiencers, and I've been on interviews and have taught with INs and stuff, and I talk to the experiencers, and slowly but surely help them to remember that
Hmm.
there are a lot of other things that they chose to forget when they came back here again. But
Hmm.
that remembrance of all these other things about, some of them didn't know they went into the Akashic records. Some of them didn't have the depth of remembrance in terms of what happens after they go through this transition space, where they see their past life and all that kind of stuff. That other
Yes.
people would call, what do they call it? When it's like an atonement of some kind, but it's not that at all. It's not that at all.
Hmm.
But it's like, I call it a decompression space. And so they remember those kind of things. They remember seeing certain figures like Yeshua, or depending on
Right.
their religious persuasion, Buddha or whoever,
Hmm.
but they don't remember the other things that are on the other side of that, because there's way
Hmm.
more than just this thing we call heaven. That heaven is like a stopping ground to an infinite space of everything. And so they don't remember a lot of that stuff until we sit down and we start talking through things, and then they're like, "Oh wow, yes, yes, yes." And so they come back
Right.
with that slight remembrance, tell people about it, but now what they're doing is they're remembering more, because as they remember more, they're going to start to share with people more
Hmm.
of their clairvoyant abilities, and what they brought back wasn't just a message about there is life after death. The message that they're really
Right.
here to talk about is how to ascend into that world. So I forgot exactly what your question was, but I believe
I
it.
believe that you answered it and then some.
Oh,
And I
okay.
don't,
Oh, okay, good. All
everything that
right.
you said was perfect.
Thank
And
you.
so, yeah, what a fantastic interview. We are going to have to start wrapping this up because I only got so much time, and I know that you only got so much
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. That's cool.
Um,
We'll come back and we'll
but
do this again at another
yeah, we
point. Okay?
definitely have to do this again. Franco, it has been such a pleasure to have you, literally an honor. Just, I'm so thankful that we were able to get together, and I'm looking forward to being able to do this again. So,
Thank you, Tammy. Thanks for having me. It's been, like I said, it was a hot minute since we've seen each other, so it was nice
yes,
to rekindle some of that energy. So it was nice. Thank you for
yes.
having me.
So you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye. You
Bye
too.
bye.